Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things. Welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Part 2. Joining me today is...
A Geek for Fun.
And Steve.
And Steve, indeed. So, we're kind of kicking around, trying to think of a topic. No one really had anything. And this has kind of been on my mind lately, so I threw this one out there. And so today we're going to talk about stereotypes. In fiction, stereotypes in general, stereotypes as they exist, whether they're always bad. That might be my hot take for the evening. We'll see how we go on that. But yeah, I've been seeing a lot of discourse in just various places lately, and it's got my mind kind of going back to and thinking about stereotypes. We talked about it like a little bit a couple weeks ago when we did Superman, of like, oh, Eve's Tessmacher, she's, portrayed as just this kind of airhead, but then the plot has this inversion of that, so is she really an airhead, or what is it? So it's like, that was kind of putting it on my mind. I saw some people talking about Ra's al Ghul and Talia al Ghul in context of Grant Morrison's run. Oh,
God.
And whether or not they are, Orientalist stereotypes, which is like really funny to accuse Grant Morrison of, because I'm pretty sure he's the only DC writer, like, for at least 2 decades that set foot inside of Asia. So, I don't know, it's just kind of been on my mind lately, and when you hear the term stereotype, at this point in time, it has kind of an inherently negative connotation. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, I just think that's interesting, because fundamentally, before we begin a deep understanding of cultures or types of people outside of ourselves, we all begin with peripheral information that we've gathered from others or gathered from media. And so I'm curious, at what point does that peripheral information just lean into stereotype? At what point does stereotype bleed into that information? I don't know, it's a topic that has just kind of been on my mind lately, so I thought it might be a good one to talk about.
Yeah, I'm here for this, okay. The point that you mentioned about Ra's al Ghul, Talia, and the Grant Morrison run, that's always been a really interesting criticism of that run to me, because I feel like people only talk about it because they want to knock Grant Morrison down a peg, not because they care about the issue. Because if they cared about the issue, did you guys know that Ra's al Ghul was created by Dennis O'Neil in the 70s? Did you know that there was a good 40 years of comics where this motherfucker was just roaming around Middle Eastern countries and pretending like he was this wide, sagely old man that was too smart for Batman? Is anyone aware of that? Because, a lot of that's there. So the idea that Grant Morrison gets flack for making Talia a supervillain and leaning on Orientalist stereotypes is it's an odd criticism to lob, because it's yeah, I guess he does that, or they do that. But I mean, that's also just Ra's al Ghul as a character. That's just the concept. I mean, as much as this doesn't sound very flattering, and I don't mean it to be insulting, even though it is kind of an insult, because I do like Dennis O'Neil. But Dennis O'Neil is what in the 70s and 80s what we think of Tom Taylor today. He was the guy who was walking into the room trying to make things new and political and hip and contemporary, and most of the time it was just gesturing. Most of the time it wasn't really grounded in anything. It was just trying to like throw in these wrinkles of like, see, it's about something. And unlike Tom Taylor, he's a good writer, so he's able to make you care about these things, but he was always like a social issue, emotional tourist. And so a lot of those early stories with Roz have that problem, and a lot of continued stories with Roz have that problem. And I feel like a lot of times, to circle back to your topic here, I think what people confuse about this is they start having moralizing statements to justify their opinion so that it feels like it's more than their opinion. And one way they do that is they start to poke on things like a story's use of certain issues or certain characters or certain cultures. They'll poke holes in something like Grant Morrison's Batman as Grant Morrison's Batman is racist for this reason, because they don't want to talk about the quality of the story with regard to how the story is executed. They just want to have a moral backing for why they don't like it that helps buttress them in an argument. And so there's a lot to be said about Batman comics in particular and their use of both racial stereotypes and other just wider issues with the whole idea of Batman. But there's an interesting way to have that conversation, and most of the time when you talk about those specific examples, people aren't interested in having those conversations. They're kind of just interested in lobbing an attack at a thing they don't like.
See, that is kind of where I've always landed on it, is the critique has always felt disingenuous or just in bad faith to me, because, yeah, I don't think... And, I'm not Asian, so I can't really speak to this. Steve's the most Asian person here.
Not the most Asian person. I'm the only Asian person here. My parents are Indian. I am, by definition, South Asian. If Roz is insulting anybody, it's me, and I'm not offended.
Well, it's just... You know what I meant, and you made it funny, so thank you.
Oh, yeah, dude.
But, the thing for me is, Raish has always been a bit of that, quote-unquote, Ho Chi Minh, evil mustache-twirling, extra long mustache and beard-twirling, Asian villain. But, it's cool. So, he's cool, so it kind of works, right? There's... And this is kind of part of what I was trying to get at and wrap my head around is writing to a stereotype inherently bad, or is there some value in those stereotypes as long as you don't let them bleed over to the point where they become insulting? And certainly that sounds like a really fine line to walk, but it's just, that's kind of been where my head's at with this. Alfie, you've been pretty quiet so far. What are your thoughts on this as the whitest one here?
Yeah, that's kind of my limiting factor, is just because as a result of that, I feel like I have the least to say. But I think just to use the Talia example, from what I've heard from people who like it and people who don't like it, a lot of what I notice when people draw the delineation is when they have the character be villainized, right? When they have the people that are fans of Talia that don't like the portrayal of her in the Morrison run are the ones that draw upon hey, this is drawing upon Tiger Mum stereotypes. This is something that she didn't act like this prior thing, and obviously you run into the thing where it's these are fictional characters. It doesn't matter how they acted prior. It doesn't matter if they needed a villain for this specific story and the story fit best, you use that character, right? We're all on the same page with that. But just in terms of being devil's advocate and talking about what pisses people off, I think when you enhance or play into stereotypes and they specifically have a negative connotation, people view that as you trying to demonize, even if that's not the person's intention. I don't think the intent was to say, oh, Talia al Ghul acts this way, so therefore every brown-skinned mother acts like this. But when you have fiction and you're publishing it in Batman and it's such a high-profile comic and impressionable kids read that thing and it plays into already established stereotypes. I remember there was a recent thing on social media I saw where people were also getting something about Scarlet Witch, and there was a Scarlet Witch fan design that depicted her as paler and more witchy stereotypically, and so people called it out like, hey, Romani stereotypes harmful and stuff. And like, wherever you land on that issue, I don't think is important right now. I just think people are more aware of that, and in an era where things are more charged, where we do see so much hate on the surface in a way that hasn't really existed in the social media age and in the television age when we're in like Trump's America and stuff like that, I do think it's fine to brush up against that. And a lot of the arguments I've heard in terms of, well, the reason why we don't talk about the craft of the story is inherently because you've done this. It makes it, I don't want to engage with it. Like, I don't want to give it my time of day. I don't want to put money to support it to even read the thing because this isn't it. Again, that's not my view, but I do think when people feel that strongly about something, it is a perspective worth hearing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, it's like on a funny line for me, because when I'm enjoying a story and then I see someone making a critique that doesn't engage with the character's actions within the story or the like story itself, but is just about peripheral things, kind of bringing maybe more reality than the story is concerned with into it, I think might be a good way to describe that. My initial reaction is this person actually arguing in good faith? And that's like such a almost impossible thing to determine. I think it's fair to say that in the vast majority of charged social media conflict keeps the algorithm alive, reactionary takes, that some percentage of them are just people who enjoy like that dog pile or that contrarian feeling of, oh, this, really acclaimed writer is actually shit and racist and I've always hated them.
Yeah.
I think there's undeniably that subset of people exists, but I never, and like, that's always, unfortunately, perhaps, that is always my initial reaction of thinking of the person complaining about this thing as one of those people before I actually want to listen to what they say. And that, probably on me as like, I'm being a bad person in that way. But fuck it, I don't know, I like when Talia al Ghul was a villain. I thought she was much more interesting and arguably, like, less stereotypical as a villainous, like, full-on bad girl kind of thing, as opposed to her role previously to Morrison, where she was, like, constantly just there to be Batman's prize. So, I don't know.
I think that kind of goes to Steve's point. I don't want to cut you off, but I think that goes to Steve's point where he was talking about, like, that inherently, if you use a character like the Al Ghuls, from their inception, they're kind of racist, like, very blatantly so. Like, people have kind of made fun of Ra's al Ghul, the demon's head. That doesn't actually translate to that. Like, they don't know where the fuck he got that from. So inherently, you're dealing with that baggage. You look at like the Mandarin and like how much struggle that character has had to go through just because inherently baked into the concept is like the yellow terror like idea. So if you're already working from a rotten base and you're not allowing creators who are from the backgrounds are depicted who have any interest whatsoever, because most of them don't even want to touch them. But say you have someone like Ram V and using Talia in the detective run, right? There's something that's a little bit more, okay, well, they can reformat, let's see if there's something worthwhile. But if you're just going from Denny O'Neil, who is a white man, to Grant Morrison, who is another white man, like, inherently, what is the difference at that point? It's all kind of fucked, and you kind of have to treat it all with the same level of vitriol at that point, in my opinion. But again, my opinion doesn't exactly have much weight in this topic.
I mean, I'll go further and say, like, I don't even think Ram V doing stuff with Batman helps remove the problematic element just because he's not white. I think the problem you kind of foundationally run into with Stereotypes as a shorthand in a lot of genre fiction, particularly superhero comics, is there's already this institutional awareness of what this is shorthand for and acceptable norms of what we're going to be doing with this shorthand for the foreseeable future. And DC and Marvel as companies are never predisposed to want to give large profile books to people who would be able to challenge those kinds of notions. Even when they do, it's usually very limited or gets cut off at the knees. It happens all the time. It's part of why I say, like, Superman, not only is he not an immigrant metaphor, but if you want to make him an immigrant metaphor, he's a really, really bad one, right? Like, there's nothing about the experience of that book that resonates on an immigrant level, because in part, what he's doing as a DC character is so entrenched in the material reality of U.S. superhero comics marketed to teenage white boys that it's really hard to break out of that unless you just kind of burn it from the ground up. And so, like, Ram V, his books have the tendency to go more personal to him, and those are definitely fine, but they are also, they're not correcting the problem. They're just kind of giving you an alternate channel. The Mandarin's a really good example because something that always annoyed me about Iron Man 3 conversations back when that movie came out is there was this whole contingent of internet fans who were really mad that Ben Kingsley Mandarin wasn't the Mandarin of the comics, and that they bait and switched the Mandarin of the comics, and that he's nothing like the Mandarin in the comics, and that they gave you the image of the Mandarin in the comics but then did nothing with it. And a lot like most things related to the MCU and comic book accuracy, no one who says that has read an Iron Man comic. I'm promising. Because I've read every Iron Man comic from the original run, so original appearance up through Iron Man 318 or something, wherever the mainline series ends, and then they go into Heroes Reborn, and then a good chunk after that. And I'm here to tell you, every fucking time the Mandarin shows up, he's a different character. Every time. The Mandarin that the people are talking about is the Mandarin in the 90s cartoon, who is sort of adapted from the 90s comics, and maybe you could say a little bit from the John Byrne comics, but every time he shows up, he's a different character. He's got different motivations, he's got different power sets, he's got a different personality, he's just a different dude. They are, though, all still tied into that visual metaphor of, like you said, of this yellow terror, of this fanged Asian man who is a bad guy, who on occasion is used as a foil for China and communism, but in other situations isn't. And part of the interesting thing about reading Iron Man comics is you have him fighting the Asian communist mystical oriental stereotype, while your hero is the arms manufacturer white capitalist. And on a surface level, it seems like, this is really offensive and bad. But you actually sit down and read the comics and you sort of realize Tony is very much not that. And the fact that he is not that is sort of the point of the story. And the Mandarin is very much not that. And the point of the story is that he's usually not that.
Man, I was about to say, the
lot of-
Mandarin's a communist? Based.
I know, right? But like so much of these things are kind of bound up in what you're allowed to get away with within like that superhero subgenre, and part of what makes Iron Man 3 such a good movie and one of the best MCU movies is it actually wants to do something with the idea of let's play on this stereotype. That whole movie is predicated on this notion of Americans have in their minds a very particular image of what a terrorist is, of what a terrorist video is, of what the response to terrorism should be. And that was a very different thing in 2013 than it is now, right? Like back in like 2013, we saw terrorist videos on the news like as a regular occurrence. Mm-hmm. There was so much propaganda about this stuff. They would replay the same Osama bin Laden videos over and over again until he got caught. Like there was a very different landscape to that. And that movie cashes in on the idea of let's give the Mandarin terrorist videos, but then let's peel it back and say, look at this. All of this is a farce. All of this is a stereotype creating an image of what you think the bad guy looks like, and in reality it doesn't match up to anything that's actually going on, because the bad guy isn't some vaguely Middle Eastern man, it's the US government. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. No, I like that a lot. It's still so funny to me that Iron Man 3 is the first movie of the MCU to be like at this point 100% retconned.
It's also funny, too, because Iron Man 3 is, I would argue, the most comic book accurate Iron Man movie. In fact, it's probably the only comic book accurate Iron Man movie.
Wow. But yeah, I don't know. It's a wild fucking ride. All right, I want to transition away from the Yellow Terror stuff and talk about another character, another aspect of this stereotyping thing. So we talked about the Asian side of things, and I'll talk about some of the Hispanic side of things that I'm more rooted to, and that is underlay, arriba. Speedy Gonzalez.
Let's go.
So Steve and I really both like Looney Tunes, and Speedy Gonzalez was one of those characters that was, you know, I'm actually still kind of surprised that I got to see Speedy Gonzalez cartoons broadcast in the 90s as we were getting more and more like sensitive about these issues. But I've heard from a lot of Mexican and just generally Hispanic people that they really loved Speedy Gonzalez, and as, you know, essentially white people became more sensitive to stereotypes, like his stuff got pulled off the air. He didn't get to be cool and fun. Like, if you ever saw him, they like toned down the Mexicanness. There's even a great joke about that in Looney Tunes Back in Action from 2003 with Porky and Speedy sitting in the cafe eating, and Porky complaining about, well, first they tell me I can't stutter, but then they tell me I'm not funny. And Speedy's like, tell me about it. It's just such like a good point. Like, you know, when we talk about the reality of the thing, yeah, we'd probably be pretty pissed off now because I'm pretty sure Speedy was voiced by Mel Blanc, because like fucking all of them were. We would probably be pretty pissed off now if you had a character like Speedy Gonzalez or like just any, you know, racially coded character, animal or otherwise, voiced by a white guy doing like a, you know, kind of terrible accent. But because I feel like a thing that people miss about it is because Speedy Gonzalez was made for children didn't really like comprehend it as an offensive accent. We just heard it and thought that was it, but it's also a cartoon, so it's just a little bit silly, you know? And so you're walking this really fine line. I'm not going to sit here and, like, defend every single Speedy Gonzalez cartoon, because I haven't seen every single Speedy Gonzalez cartoon. There's probably some, like, more blatantly racist shit that is, like, you know, like, hard negative stereotypes as opposed to, like, I suppose there is a hierarchy to this of like hard negative stereotype, hard positive stereotype, kind of that nebulous middle. Mm-hmm. So like an example of a racist stereotype would be with something like like with Speedy Gonzalez, because I do know there was one character that was like his cousin or whatever that was like super lazy. So
The slow one, yeah.
Mexican. Yeah. So you got your like lazy Mexican stereotype. That's your hard negative. Like a classic example of like a positive stereotype is among like black people, like, oh, they're great at basketball and they got big penises. Like those are positive stereotypes, but they're still stereotypes. And then there's like, you know, more nebulous ones where you're gonna kind of get a look if you use them, but it's not necessarily a negative look. It's just gonna be like a, okay, we'll wait and see. We don't know where this is going. And so I feel like the majority of a character like Speedy Gonzalez probably floated more in that nebulous to positive range of stereotypes. And so he kind of became beloved because they weren't making other Mexican-coded cartoon characters or Hispanic-coded cartoon characters. They were just, you know, if you could get them, they were, you know, blatantly negative stereotype. So to see this character that existed in a positive light, he's the clever one, he's the trickster, he's the Bugs Bunny or the Roadrunner of this this side of the world, is just so cool and so fun and so refreshing. But then because, you know, it was made by fucking white guys in the 1930s and 40s, yeah, it's got some racist shit in there. That's just, you know, par for the course. So there was like this big negative reaction of well, we got to pull all of it now. It's like, but no, now you're getting rid of them, and that's worse than just dealing with the. That part was a little bad.
There's a line here. I feel like I'm stealing this from George Carlin. I feel like this is a George Carlin bit, but like there's a difference between who is being harmed by something and who's the one that's upset about it. And when it comes to something like Speedy Gonzalez, I think that's a really good example of who's actually being hurt by this and who's the one that feels like this is a bad thing that's harming people. Because I don't think those two groups overlap very often in issues like this. Speedy Gonzalez has had kind of a resurgence, it seems like, in the last 4 or 5 years when people have started to question this idea, like, okay, is he actually offensive? Because he is. But there are so many people who people claim that he's making fun of that actually love him, like you talked about there. Like, if that's what's happening, if there is an entire like South American or Hispanic community that enjoys Speedy Gonzalez, then who has the right to say this is a bad Hispanic stereotype that's harming people? Who is it harming? Who's mad about this? I feel like that should weigh into these conversations sometimes, and most of the time they don't. And this kind of gets into the whole Twitter of it all, of like, when someone says something is offensive, I really always want to stop and ask, unless you're the guy of the party being offended, who is mad that they were offended by this? Whose honor are you trying to defend by saying this? Because if you're not defending anybody's honor, then is it really that much of a problem to begin with? So that's one thing. But the other thing about the Speedy Gonzalez thing and like your sort of hard line of like the hard positive or like the hard negative, some of those positive stereotypes, as opposed to like the ones that are negative, the positive stereotypes tend to be the ones that I feel like have the most actual negative consequence on people. The Asians are good at math, right? Like that's the one that people get made fun of more so than any sort of negative stereotype. Or when you look at like India today and its Trumpian fascist government, or really you could say Trump is more of like a Modi fascist because Modi came first. But when you look at like India's fascist government, right? It is all hardlined, right-wing, Hindu majority. And that's what's going on. And so much of their cultural output is positive stereotypes of what Hinduism is and what Hindu men are. And it's all coasted in the colors of the religion and in certain interpretations of the religion. And it's all being broadcast out as like, this is why they are the superior people. And more often than not, like they are portraying all of this in stereotypical form, in caricatures, in movies like RRR, which I don't really like, but a lot of people love, and I don't think it's a very good movie. But that whole movie has this like raging undercurrent of like Hindu supremacy and Hindu supremacist imagery that is in the real world very damaging if you live in India. And it's all coasted on these stereotypes of what Hinduism is supposed to be about. And that ends up being a lot more in the real world harmful than the negative stereotypes about Indian people all owning gas stations in America. Like, if someone made a joke to me about, like, all Indians do in America is own motels and 7-Elevens, it's kind of a dick thing to do, but I'm not going to be that upset about it. Relative to the Hindu supremacy stuff, that seems like it's the real tangible harm there.
Mm-hmm. No, again, that's the thing of, like, a positive stereotype is not inherently good. It just has a more positive connotation than, like, the hard negative ones. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good thing to be stereotyped like that, but there is, you know, there's this assumption that exists within positive stereotypes. So then when, you know, if you are a black kid that is not good at basketball, suddenly that becomes really awkward. I remember, I think Donald Glover did a whole bit about those. Of like, no, you're gonna like basketball and sneakers. So it's like, there is, you know, there is harm being done by them, but just in and of themselves, I guess the right terminology might be they are like deceptively positive, perhaps.
Yeah.
So it's just an interesting thing, and it like creates these perceptions because when you're doing any kind of writing for any kind of media, film, comics, TV, novels, what have you, and you start to venture, like they say write what you know, but no one follows that advice. When you start to venture outside of your wheelhouse and you like want to go or like include other characters from different races or visit different locations, if you haven't been to them, your only thing to pull from is what you have seen, likely from other media. And like, I don't care if even it's a documentary, right? Like, documentaries fool you into thinking they're more accurate than just a fucking movie someone made up in their head. They're really not. It's all just in the choice of the edit and the choice of presentation. So you only have these things to pull from. So, like, fundamentally, stereotypes are kind of your bedrock. Unless you do just a shit ton of research and start interviewing people from these different locations and cultures, which I'm not saying you shouldn't do, but I am going to pose the question of, is it worth your time, depending on what you are doing with the characters, with the world, with wherever you're taking things? And that's a question I'm really interested to hear your guys' thoughts on.
Alfie, you want to go first?
Apparently no one wants to go.
I just had a whole thing, so I feel like I need to wait. So,
Alfie, what do you think? Sorry, Alfie. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's just like, man, like I'm the one here that's like in the the sights are trained on me. You know, I got like the sniper rifle. I don't know, man. I just don't know. I don't have a definitive response to that one, which I know is a cop out. I just don't know.
Okay. Do you have like an initial, like, what is your initial thought? I'm not going to hold you to it. I'm just curious what your initial reaction to that is, besides just not knowing. I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot too hard. Just tell me.
No,
I'm sorry.
You're fine. You're fine. I don't know, Steve. You go.
I mean, I think part of being able to create and being an artist is being both an observer of people and an observer of yourself. And if you can't straddle that line, then you probably don't have much worth saying. So if you want to write a story about something that, or draw something, or make something about a person or culture or place that you haven't been to, then you have to start asking those two questions of like, number one, what about me wants to do this? And is it because I'm seeing something of myself reflected in this subject? And then number two, this other subject doesn't exist in my imagination. It's out there. It's real. There are implications to me doing something that have consequences to the real world representation of it. And straddling that line is really important, but it also means that like you can't be afraid to never do it, right? Dune is a really good example of this, I think, because Frank Herbert was a white guy, but he studied a lot of Middle Eastern culture. He studied a lot of history. He based so much of that world and those characters and that lore and their language on things that he read and things that he saw, and a lot of this was just kind of as an outside observer. And there are critiques of Orientalism and stereotypes in Frank Herbert's books and as those books go on, for sure. But there was this honest attempt to articulate what his ideas were with the understanding that there was sort of a real world parallel to it and that his perspective on that real world was going to be inherently limited. That's why the protagonist of Dune is a white kid who walks into a situation and not the native people of Arrakis that the story is emerging from, because that perspective has to come from somewhere, and that perspective is both inherently limiting but also kind of liberating once you figure out where your anchor is. So I feel like it's a problem you have to be sensitive to, but it's one of those things where, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier about characters or things being framed in a negative light and you like them and that's why you get defensive about them. When you do those things, you can't come from the perspective of, I'm going to be 100% respectful of this culture and everyone there is going to be really smart and we're going to make sure that the dumb white people know that they're the dumb white people and just kind of like apologize for your existence in the process of making it. Because if you're going to do that, then just don't fucking do it. Don't be a coward, right? Like if you're going to do it, then do it for real. And doing it for real means you have to risk something. You have to be like, okay, I'm going to dive into this with what I know, understanding that I could totally fall on my face as I do it, but that's an important process. And those consequences become greater as you have more of a voice, and that responsibility grows as you have more of a voice, but that's still kind of an obligation that you have. I mean, Martin Scorsese just made that movie about the massacre of indigenous people, about the Osage in Killers of the Flower Moon, and he is coming at it from the perspective of someone that historically is part of a group of people that profited from it, and his perspective is limited in that way. But that's what that movie is about. It's about the limit of that perspective. It's about the way the tragedy is framed and who has a right to tell that story. So you can be super aware of it and sometimes play into stereotypes and other times not, but it's just a matter of like, are you self-aware enough to kind of understand, number one, why are you doing it the way you are? And number two, recognizing that whatever you make doesn't exist in some sort of void, that there is going to be some kind of pushback when you push forward.
I want to... Oh, no.
Go ahead.
You go.
Okay.
No,
one thing that I do think adds to that, especially with a luxury that writers have now, that you listed Frank Herbert, right, for Dune as something that he made strides to do it, but he's still very much kind of writing on an island with that. I think a big thing that I think more people should take advantage of now is it is so easy to connect to people who live the experience you want to write about. Like, more than ever, like, just all of us have Twitter accounts, right? All of us with followers. You can interact with people from hundreds of different backgrounds, and all of them will have a slight variation on something, right? So you're going to get perspectives, and you're not going to have people write stories for you, but it doesn't take much to be like, hey, I'm going to be tackling this topic. I want to be talking about these aspects. Can you proofread this for me? Can you give me a sensitivity read on this? Like, is this something that is touching on things in a way that's powerful, that's effective, that still works as a crafted story, but am I doing any harm with the writing here? And I think sometimes, depending on how you're breaching things, you might butt up into things where, like, a choice or a decision that you have to make that's most beneficial to your narrative can sometimes on the surface like brush up against something where people's like, oh, I don't think you should take it in that way, right? And that becomes a conflict where you have to kind of have the balls to say, all right, what do I want to do, or what do I want to do this? But I think a lot of the times that just kind of means maybe going back to the drawing board and thinking of a way where you can get something even better that also doesn't have to deal with that. And I think I like your example a lot, Steve, with Dune, because I think that's something where that is a text that improves the more you know about the surrounding culture and the surrounding history of it. It feels more layered, it feels more nuanced once you as a reader also get that perspective. And I think that's something really powerful about fiction, where you can put the thoughts and feelings and your interests and your fascinations and the things that make you sad, the thing that makes you happy, you can put them into a story. And if that can bleed over and make someone else feel that curiosity of like, oh, I want to learn about this now, or oh, I have this completely different perspective. Even if, like, again, it's a fictionalized telling, it's never going to match the perspective of someone who actually lives those events. It's limited from that, that standpoint. It still gets the ball rolling. It still opens people's minds. And I think at a time now where we are so safe and kind of sugar-coated with our media, where the story has to explain like what it's about, where the characters have to be extremely focused, group tested within an inch of their life as not to upset anyone, I feel like that level of curiosity and kind of wonder and like human connection is really at risk. So I think that is needed now more than ever, would be my answer.
I agree. I do like the existence and the proliferation of the idea of accepting like sensitivity reads from as a form of critique. I think that is something that writers should not shy away from, because we all do have blind spots. I think everyone has heard that sentiment of like, well, everyone's got a little bit of like a racial blind spot or like a inherent bigotry. And I do think that's true. So I think it's good to be aware of that, and instead of just pretending it doesn't exist or pretending you're above it, I think it's inherently valuable to be aware of that and reach out to people and try to consider some of those things. That being said, I do think that there can be a point where whereas Steve said, if you're gonna do it, just do it. Where nothing ruins a story more than when you can tell that the writer does not have confidence in what they're writing. It makes it just feel like it's all gonna fall flat on its face. And then before we get too far away from it, Steve mentioned Killers of the Flower Moon, and it got me thinking again about like positive stereotypes that might not apply to the individual. And the first thought I had that's like really, really funny to me is a Native American person who, they're all so like in touch with the spirit of the earth. But what if you're a Native American person with like really bad seasonal allergies?
That's good.
Just
That's
a
good.
funny image to me. Of course that person exists. That person has to exist, but it's just like just a counterintuitive image, and I really like that.
Anyway. We were talking about this before we started recording, but I think another show that like really handles stereotypes and poking fun at stereotypes and also at the perspective that the stereotypes are coming from is King of the Hill, right? Like that show is so clever about that. The first episode where Khan moves to the neighborhood Hank and them go over and they see that he's Asian, but they keep referring to him as Oriental. And there's a bit where they walk up to Khan and he's like, "So are you Chinese or Japanese?" And Khan's like, he's Laotian. And he's like, "So are you Chinese or Japanese?"
Japanese.
And like, you know, like there's a version of that where like you just cut and like ignore the confrontation, but like Khan's like, "No, we are from Laos. That's where we are from." And then when they have that exchange, it turns into this: the white rednecks in the alley drinking beer don't understand the Asian person. The Asian person is tiny and angry and talks in a high-pitched voice and is mad about the fact that they live with a bunch of poor white people. Like they're go back and forth hitting that stereotype in such a fun way. And as that series goes on, Khan and his daughter and his wife and all of them become these really interesting, really fleshed out characters, in part because they play with these concepts of what is the stereotype. There's a really good episode where Connie doesn't get into a summer program because they have too many Asian people already. And then they just have this conversation of like, "So are you telling me that if she was really smart, successful, and white, she would have gotten in because there are too many smart, successful Asians?" And it's really funny, but it does kind of, it appeals to a certain kind of frustration. And then when that happens, Khan decides to essentially just like try to be a hillbilly and live the hillbilly life and give up on his responsibilities. And that's really entertaining. The way that show is able to kind of both make fun of the stereotypes themselves, play with the things that's funny about them, and never punch down is something that I feel like we really lose in a lot of fiction, where you're kind of just glazing or you're not confident in what you're talking about.
You also, with the Chinese, Japanese, Laotian, I really, really love when they bring that bit back when Cotton first meets Khan.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, "He's Japanese." "No, he's not. He's Laotian, ain't you, Mr. Khan?" How'd you know that? Because there's a good, like, topic of, there's two kinds of racist people. People who can't tell the difference at all between any kind of, like, subtle racial divides of people of different skin colors, and people who can tell exactly the difference.
Khan is such a good character. I fucking loved it.
Yeah. So no, that's King of the Hill is a really great example of something that does like a lot of good topic on race, especially for the 2000s, where it's not overly sensitive. It all really comes down to just people need to use propane. Hank, you're so fucking wrong. Grilled food with charcoal is so much better, but whatever.
I understand.
Yeah. there's a really good episode in that with I think it was Chris Rock voiced the character of Rufus. He's a stand-up black comedian, and like Hank ends up having a bit of like a confrontation with him, and then they eventually settle things, and he becomes like Hank's black friend that shows up every so often.
Yeah.
The whole episode with Lady Bird attacking black people, and they think Lady Bird's racist because she's picking it up from Hank, and it turns out, no, Hank's not racist, he just hates repairmen. And Lady Bird's picked up on that. And he's like so happy that Lady Bird's out in the yard just like tear the shit out of a white dude because the guy came to fix his furnace. He's like, "Oh, yay! This is the greatest news ever!" Meanwhile, he's fucking like running away from this dude.
There's another really good one where Khan's mom comes to visit, and they do like the overbearing Asian mother-in-law bit where like every time Min tries to clean something, she's like, no, do it this way, allow me to demonstrate, and then just ends up taking over the whole house.
Mm-hmm.
It's good shit. I love that show.
Yeah. King of the Hill was great at tackling just a lot of those like hot button issues, but in a way that never lost the comedy, and I really appreciate it for that. And never had to get like mean or stupid like its contemporaries of South Park and The Simpsons.
And I
So I
mean,
always appreciated that about that.
it's also like it's not one of those shows where you go back and you're like, okay, this topic they clearly kind of fumbled because of the era. Like I went through and rewatched all of it because of the new season, and I don't think there's any instance where I'm like, this would be offensive today. I feel like even when the show gets less good, it's never just outright bad, and it's never fumbling the topic.
It was a subtle line, and Mike Judge couldn't really get much else off the ground after that. Like, he had a couple movies and stuff, but like nothing really had the same cultural impact. I remember Comedy Central, after King of the Hill ended, gave Mike Judge a one-season animated series that the whole concept was King of the Hill, but it's a liberal family this time, and that just didn't hit. There was something special about King of the Hill. That was like not just right time, but like really the era it came out in really did help it, and just good writing. All right, other stuff to talk about with stereotypes. Okay, the last topic I had in mind is again, probably something that's going to make Alfie the most uncomfortable, but I'll start with him. Alfie, do you feel like it's a bit of a double standard, or a bit of like complaining about it in one way but doing it in another, when people talk about like stereotypical accents, but then we'll do like the kind of British accent gags? You think there's a little bit of a double standard there?
Fucking alien, I don't know really what you're talking about there. I think, when you have that kind of thing, you gotta really kind of consider, are they having a laugh? Or are they being fucking serious? I gotta have that. No, I don't. They physically paid me. You realize. I don't think it's a double standard, because I think what I like to look at with a lot of comedy is I think it's the best comedy has to punch up. At least in my opinion, the stuff that makes me laugh the most is when it's punching up. I don't like punching down comedy too much. Now and again, someone can make a banger, right? But most of the time, I think you hit on something, or you're playing with stereotypes. If you're shooting upwards, tends to be pretty smooth sailing. So I think the British inherently, throughout their history, have earned infinite jokes from now till the end of time. So I think I truly feel like because of that, because no matter how much Brexit and like Nigel Farage type guys want to act like, oh, London's becoming 80% ethnic groups, our culture is dying, like, it's not, it's bullshit, because they want to parrot that thing. You're never going to run out of an issue for that. I think the problem comes with, like I said, when you're punching it with the teller, right? Like, if a black guy starts doing an impression, right, and the exaggerating aspects, it can be really funny, and you're allowed to laugh at it. Like it's. But I feel like when a white guy wants to start imitating a black guy, there's always immediately kind of like you narrow your eyes and you start cringing, and you're like, oh god, like it's inherently there's a dynamic there, and I feel like, even outside of just being offensive, it's just not good material. Like it's just really kind of lazy to do the silly voice like that. I think to a different extent, though, if you're writing purposefully for a character, and this kind of ties back to something I wanted to talk about, because the big example I feel like with stereotypes that did kind of change things with an industry recently would be Apu. And the voice acting industry, and that whole documentary about Apu. And I want to know Steve's stance on this, because that's had a kind of a spurring wheel effect. And now you see things like the current, like, they're making like a new Avatar Last Airbender movie, and they've recast everyone to match the backgrounds from the people, and that's becoming more of like a voice acting movement. And that's kind of people have a lot of opinions on that back and forth, but to get to the main point, in terms of like mimicking a voice or doing kind of like stereotypes, if you're writing a character and you're having that character be part of like a comedy show like The Simpsons or something, and you're not just doing it as like, oh, this one-off gag. If you're giving someone like a pillow, have episodes where you see his family and you think, and it's, you have jokes which I think are still pretty funny, but again, it's not done in a way where it feels like we're singling this person out. At least from what I've seen, I want to hear what Steve's stance on that is.
Yeah, Apu's a weird one because he never bothered me personally, but I was also never a big Simpsons fan, and I wonder if the two are correlated in some way, of like maybe just his existence is why I wasn't a big Simpsons fan. I don't know. But so this kind of all comes back to be to the issue I mentioned before of like who exactly is getting hurt and in what way, and is that why we're frustrated about this or not? So when it comes to things like accents and stuff, Alfie, you're right in that a lot of it does feel kind of lowest common denominator, and it's less funny for that reason. But the other thing about it is like stand-up comedy is a very different thing than voice acting, because the stand-up comedy, the person on stage is always the person that you're directing everything to, and so their perspective and where they come from and what they look like and what they sound like, that is inherent to their bit. In a way that voice acting, the person disappears into the voice. And part of the reason the Avatar stuff, I think, is probably good and warranted is the real harm in that situation is if there are Asian voice actors and you have an Asian character, then why are you hiring a white guy? To me, it's got nothing to do with the idea that white people can't voice Asian characters or characters that are meant to be Asian. It's that is the existence of the white actors taking up all the jobs of Asian characters causing an actual harm where Asian voice actors can't get roles that they should be getting. And I think that's a tangible problem and a tangible harm that we can latch onto and say, yeah, maybe we should stop doing this. And maybe if we had more people in the room that represented what they were reading or voicing, there could be an improvement on the material because you're not forcing the perspective from the outside. Avatar The Last Airbender is a really good show, and it's one of those things where I never noticed it as a kid. Like, I got through all 3 seasons of that original series multiple times, and it never crossed my mind at any point that these characters were not being voiced by racially appropriate voice actors. Because as a kid watching it, you just don't think about it. But then as an adult, unless you're like reading into the names of the voice actors for every character, you also just kind of don't notice it. And Asian parents have gotten to this point, I've noticed, where back when I was a kid, it didn't matter where you were living or who you were. Your Asian parents were going to give you an Asian name, and you were going to get made fun of as a kid. And I was kind of I was rare in that situation, and my dad was very clear about like, no, we are not giving you a fucking Indian name. You're going to school with white people. You got to have a white guy name. So we're naming you Steve. So that's kind of become the standard, it seems like now, where I see a lot of people, like a lot of Indian people too. I'm like, oh, what the fuck do you mean your name is John? You're not a John. And it's just like a common thing now. And I think when I look at like voice actor lists, that's kind of where my head goes. I'm like, his name is Connor. But he could be Asian. He could be Indian. I don't fucking know. Who knows at this point? And unless I look into it, there's no telling. So I'm glad that that's happening. Outside of the topic, I really don't think we need to be making more Avatar. The 3 seasons of the TV show are great and fantastic, and everything after that sucks, and I don't need more. But if you're going to keep doing more, then yeah, if you've got an Asian character, hire an Asian voice actor.
The only thing I've heard in regards to this with the new Avatar series is the one character or the one actor that was actually Asian. I think it was the Zuko actor, but I don't remember. The one character that was actually Asian is the one actor that they're not having reprise his role for the new stuff, but he's also still playing like another character in the show.
The weirdest thing about that too is the guy who played Zuko voiced him not only for all 3 seasons of the original, but he also voiced the older old man version of Zuko that shows up later. So, like, you can't be like he aged out of his voice and has a different voice, because we already saw that, and he clearly didn't. It's very silly.
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting discussion. I think in general they just want to get away from the original cast. Is my theory on it. But I've never been like a huge Avatar fan. I watched it back in like lockdown, and that was about it for me. And I was like, yeah, I'll have one conversation with Steve and Alfie about Avatar, and I think I'm done. I think I've fully disengaged from this franchise now. Thanks. Okay, bye.
I feel that.
Yeah. I don't know. Back to the Apu thing. I don't know, because like I remember when that documentary came out, and like I didn't watch it because I don't really give a shit about The Simpsons. I've had casual interest in The Simpsons, but I was watching a video the other night and someone said 36 years ago. I'm like, that shit's been on for 36 years? Holy crap. Imagine 36 years of mildly interesting. But I remember like when that documentary broke, and it was like the trending thing for a couple weeks, and you know, had of course the very typical reactions of like the keyboard social justice warriors on the far left being like, and we're gonna boycott The Simpsons because this never should have happened, it should never have been okay. And then you had like the far right, Apu was always a great character and they're just trying to ruin him. And like my reaction to it was, Apu wasn't voiced by an Indian guy? Because while the accent is not like, I don't know enough about like interacting with, you know, deeply accented Indian people. The only Indian person I know I didn't know was Indian until like, I don't know, 2 years after I'd met him. I don't know enough about it. I'm not savvy enough to really say, but I think it is fair to say that while the original Apu voice was a stereotype, it wasn't like going super far overboard to the point where the accent was the joke. It was just a white guy doing his best Indian accent. Which is not to say good, but I think there is a line there where the accent itself was not attempting to be offensive or anything. Arguably, a lot of the other stuff around Apu was more offensive than just the accent itself. So even if they'd had an Indian guy voicing it, it probably still would have been more of a problem. But I don't know, I just remember that was my reaction to that whole thing of, he wasn't voiced by an Indian guy this whole time? What?
Yeah, the Apu thing is funny because you're right. The accent itself wasn't the joke, and I feel like there are so many other examples of this being worse and no one ever talks about it. Like Latka in Taxi, or the vaguely accented character, or the badly accented character in that 70s show. I can't forget his name. I don't remember his name. It's been forever since I've seen that show. Fez, yeah. Like, Fez and Latka, like, they bothered me from minute one in a way that Apu never did.
Yeah.
Because I feel like in those two shows, that is the joke. The joke is that they're foreign and weird.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that is entirely the joke in that 70s show of Fez is just the foreign exchange student, and he doesn't understand the culture, and he gets like the just gets the short end of the stick for all like the emasculating things. And in all fairness, I did like that 70s show. They do, you know, get him his justice back of, no, it wasn't because he was foreign, it was just he was in that awkward high school phase where he was way too horny for his own good, and once they're all like out of high school and, you know, like living in their own apartments and stuff, Fez like suddenly is the only one that's able to pull tail, which is pretty funny. He got his back, so I appreciated that.
Yeah, I liked that 70s show for the most part. He was just always that one character that kind of bothered me for that reason, and that's one of the few examples where I feel like that kind of stereotype thing legitimately bothered me. Because another example from when I was a kid is Rolf on Ed, Edd n Eddy. Like, I don't know what the fuck he was satirizing or parodying or making fun of, but dude was funny and I loved him.
Yeah, no, because like he was just the foreign kid on the block, and like he always had just mountains of chores to do every day that were like so fucking ridiculous. He's got to like herd the sheep in the fucking cul-de-sac in the suburbs they all live in.
Well, like the cool thing too about that is like that's hilarious because it likes he lives in a different reality. But Rolf was never the weird kid. Like he was part of the cool kids. He hung out with Kevin all the time. They were like best friends.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever shit ever hit the fan, the most like masculine, tough guy character in that show was Rolf.
Yeah, yeah, and so I don't know. It's interesting to play with these stereotypes, and I don't know who voiced Rolf. That's I don't even want to look it up because I'm just
no. It's just better this way.
It's more interesting to have the curiosity there.
Do you want to know? I just looked it up. Do you want to know what Rolf's ethnicity actually is? You'll never guess.
His character in the show or the actual
in the show.
Okay, yeah, sure. What is it?
Italian.
Okay.
That's so good. That's so good.
I don't see it like at all, but fair enough.
Right, you'd never guess in a million years.
There's not the accent whatsoever. Oh.
There's a bit in that show that's always stayed with me because it just kind of highlights how weird and alien Rolf is, where like Eddie is like basically like pretending to be a spy, and he like whispers in Rolf's ear, "The crow caws at midnight," and then Rolf says something like, "And the cat sours the basil." Rolf doesn't have time to talk politics. Like I don't know what the fuck that means, but that's awesome.
Never related to anyone harder.
What the fuck? It's such a good show.
I like that, Eddie. Yeah.
Unless we had anywhere else we wanted to go, I did want to mention sports stereotypes and uses of stereotypes real quick. So a few years ago, there was a big deal that has now become a big deal again, that the Washington Redskins changed their name to first the Washington football team and then the Washington Commanders. And now there is a push from Donald Trump to change the name back to the Redskins as they are in the process of building a new stadium and the legal hurdles that come with that. So, number one, Redskins, offensive term, shouldn't have a football team named the Redskins. Number two, the actual mascot and caricature of a native person on all of their paraphernalia was a caricature and stereotyped and really, really racist, and we probably shouldn't have that either. The problem with the Commanders' name debate, though, to me, is these kinds of questions about whether or not a thing is offensive and whether or not people are getting harmed by it, this thing that I've been harping on, all of it all kind of comes down to the same problem that I keep kind of dancing around, which is you have to ground any of these disagreements in just like the fundamental logic of living in a world that's capitalist and living in America where there are capitalist aims for all of these things. Because it doesn't matter how good-willed you are, if there is a certain level of capitalist exploitation that can be on the right side of history or the wrong side of history, that's what's going to happen regardless of consistency. So, all that to say, another football team with a racist mascot that we should probably change in Arrowhead Stadium with an Arrowhead logo? The Kansas City Chiefs. We should probably do something about that. But here's the thing. We can't do anything about that because the Chiefs are a dynasty. They are in their prime. They have the best quarterback in football. Arguably, they have the greatest quarterback of all time, depending on whether or not you want to get into the GOAT conversation. But the optics and the money and the dynasty that flow into the Kansas City Chiefs right now makes the conversation of should the Chiefs change their name and change the name of their stadium and change their mascot basically impossible. And there is another question of like, are people legitimately upset about this because Chief is not necessarily as bad as Redskin? But then there are other layers of the things that they do in Kansas City that makes it a little bit more racist too. And like, who's getting upset about this, really? And it comes back to what I was saying about the Apu thing of like, are there a lot of Native American people who are Kansas City Chiefs fans and are upset about the fact that they have an indigenous stereotype as their whole brand? Maybe, but are there more indigenous people that probably don't engage with football at all, in part because of Washington and Kansas City? Also maybe. But it's a hard thing to quantify, and even if you could, where would the mobilization come to try and push that sort of change to happen? Because right now, it's not even a conversation, right? Like, the Commanders thing, that was a dialogue for years and years and years, and it's still a dialogue. But no one's having that conversation about the Chiefs. And it does make me wonder, like, all the people that are standing up right now saying, no, Donald Trump shouldn't force the Commanders to change their name back. It's racist. We need to stand our ground on this. Where are you guys at with the Chiefs? Do you see that too? Are you upset about that too? I'm not saying that you can't that you shouldn't have this conversation, but shouldn't you have the other conversation too?
I think all football teams should be renamed to really girly mythic things, just to really piss off the conservatives and just football fans in general, because I don't give a fuck about that sport. The Texas Fairies, the Washington Mermaids. just because I know it'll make people angry.
Nah, we got tough mermaids.
Yeah. No, we call them the Sirens.
I figured maybe Alfie would have some opinions on that, since you are more of a sports guy. And I mean, there's been a long history of sports teams being like this, but that's the thing that's always bothered me of like, why do we not talk about this with the Chiefs? And the answer is simple, because capitalism and Mahomes is the GOAT, so you can't.
Yeah, there's been a lot of people talking with, like, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think there was similar things that happened with some NBA teams. A lot of NBA teams got renamed pretty early on, in comparison to football teams, because it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't as big of a dynasty and infrastructure. It's only recently, and it still right now isn't even comparable to how much money football brings in. So it's not quite as ingrained, but there's still plenty of talks about not necessarily the mascot itself being racist, but just kind of the culture of the Boston Celtics inherently. Yeah. But unless you wipe the city of Boston off, I feel like we just gotta stop with that one.
Yeah, I mean, the Celtics are a good one. I mean, Cleveland had the Indians for a while. Atlanta's got the Braves. Like, there's a pretty long history of like either sports mascots or sports franchises having some sort of like weirdly racially charged name, and we've done a pretty decent job in some leagues of quelling that out. But it's a really inconsistent effort, and it's one of those things where it feels like going one team at a time doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me when all of these are parts of regulated leagues where like the NFL or the NBA or the MLB can just say, hey, change your name. But they're never going to do that because of the amount of money a lot of this stuff brings in.
Mm-hmm. What is the most blatantly like stereotypical or like just full-on racist thing where they'll never change it because it just makes too much money? Was it the Redskins or is it the Chiefs, or what do you think?
Well, since the Redskins got changed, I think that one's out. If you're talking like purely football, I think it is definitely the Chiefs at this point because they're in their whole dynasty era. The Braves is still going, right? Like, that's still an MLB team, and that's not a conversation we're having, and the Braves have been around a very long time. Most baseball teams have been around longer than, like, any other sport or professional sport in America. So, like, a lot of that stuff isn't ingrained in. I don't see the Braves, like, being a thing that we ever really change, unless there are conversations about it that I'm just missing, but because I'm not a baseball guy, but that's the thing that I feel like that's not going to happen anytime soon. And I think if the Chiefs, I think if Mahomes becomes the undisputed GOAT the way Tom Brady is right now, or was before Mahomes, then I don't think the Chiefs' name is ever going away. I think at that point, if it just becomes part of the history of the NFL, it's just never going away.
Interesting. I don't know. I don't have a ton of sports opinions, so I don't really know. Probably don't use straight up racial slurs as your team name.
Yeah, the good rule of thumb.
I don't know. Was just like imagining the worst ways to go about naming things. But yeah. All right. Well, I think that covered a lot of the bases I was really interested in talking about. Again, I think there is, like most things on the internet these days, there's a lot more nuance to this topic than I think people give it credit for. And I don't know, I thought we covered some interesting ground here. If you listen to this and think that I'm a terrible racist, I guess that's not really up to me anymore. It's something that's determined by others. So there we go. If anything, I just want to let it be known, though, I only got these opinions after Alfie explicitly told me them off recording. Okay, so there.
I was just about to say, don't worry, use me as a shield. I'm so glad you had the initiative on that one. I got you, man, don't worry. It's gonna be that shot of when he comes in, like Super comes in, he like blocks the little girl from like the kaiju debris. That's just me with racist allegations versus you. So don't worry.
I do like. I will just say real quick before we wrap up here. We mostly talked about like racial stereotypes in here. There are of course like sexual orientation stereotypes and like gendered stereotypes. That are just as valuable to talk about, that can be just as hurtful or just as misinforming. And it's just, I kind of wanted to talk about more of that stuff. I mentioned like Tessmacher in the new Superman movie at the start of this. I just don't think the conversation naturally led there, so, you know, maybe we'll do a second part sometime and just make Alfie all the more uncomfortable. We'll see.
Oh wow! I'm also the straightest man here, so this is extra good.
I don't know how I feel about you claiming to be the straightest man here. That kind of bothers me. It feels like the gauntlet got thrown down. So you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and really like throw that gauntlet back down. First one to leave the call tonight is gay. Boom.
Hey.
All right.
All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I am the geek for fun, champion of the oppressed.
And I am being oppressed by the British.
And we are your Geeky Gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.